Okay, so now the session is being recorded. So, good morning, everyone. I suppose I need to introduce myself for those of you who haven't met me before. So, my name is Adnan Trakic, originally from Bosnia, but I reside in Malaysia and work at Monash University, Malaysia. So, I'm head of business law and taxation department here in Monash, Malaysian campus. So we do not have a law school based on our campus, but we have a law department as part of business school. And we have quite a number of colleagues doing research in various areas, not only commercial law, but other areas of law, public law, constitutional law, right, employment law. So today's topic basically is part of soon to be Dr. Priya. So part of the Priya's PhD, and Priya is our colleague here in our school, and she's at the completion stage of her PhD. So she certainly knows way more than this, than me on the topic. I was privileged to have been Priya's PhD supervisor. So I think when we look at the topic of trafficking of migrant workers for forced labor, Malaysian legislative framework, I think there are three main themes. You have trafficking, and then you have migrant workers, and then you have forced labor. So I think it's important to really understand these concepts properly. For example, if you have been trafficked into Malaysia, so you deserve to be protected. You are the victim of trafficking, so the law as well accords you certain protections. Whereas if you have been smuggled, the situation changes. Then you may no longer be a victim. Maybe in certain cases you may be considered as a perpetrator of a crime as well. So I think proper understanding of the terms is important, the context as well, and the extent to which this is an issue in Malaysia will be certainly much better explained by our panelists today. So we are definitely very pleased to have speakers coming from government, from representing employers, trade unions, employees, civil society. We can't wait to listen to your presentations. But I think at the start, it's important to just remind you all, if we can, to stick to our time. So I think Dr. Ravi has been privileged to have been given 5 minutes more than everyone else. I think Dr. Ravi will be presenting for 20 minutes as a keynote speaker for today, and then the other distinguished speakers will present their viewpoints in 15 minutes. So I'll be rather conservative with time, knowing that Zoom fatigue is a real thing, and we would certainly like to be able to finish the whole thing in 2 hours. And before we end, we would like to have some kind of a dialogue as well, maybe Q&A session. So now let me introduce to you our first speaker for today. Keynote speaker for today is Dr. Ravi Mahalingam. So Dr. Ravi is the Principal Assistant Secretary with the Ministry of Home Affairs, a driven public officer with more than 12 years of experience in management and policy and public policy making. I think Dr. Ravi as well has been involved in the National Strategic Office to the Council of Anti-Trafficking in Persons and Anti-Smuggling of Migrants, known as MAPO. And so Dr. Ravi, I suppose, will give us an overview of the trafficking of migrant workers for forced labor, with a focus on the government's response in enacting Anti-Trafficking in Persons and Anti-Smuggling of Migrants Act 2007. I also believe he will look into the role, function, and significance of MAPO and the Ministry of Home Affairs in tackling this problem. So, with any further ado, Dr. Ravi, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Anand. I hope you can hear me well.
Yes, we can.
Salam Sejahtera and very good morning all. Dr. Anand, Ms. Priya, soon to be Dr. Priya, the Director of Principles of Responsible Management Education, Monash University, Malaysia, distinguished panels, ladies and gentlemen. First and foremost, I would like to take this opportunity to thank Monash University, Malaysia for inviting NSM MAPO. If let's say I want to spell out the full name of my office, National Strategic Office to the Council for Anti-Trafficking in Persons and Anti-Smuggling of Migrants, it's long. So I'll make it short, NSM MAPO, to this forum, Trafficking of Migrants for Forced Labor, the Malaysian Legislative Perspective. Okay. The event today marks yet another opportunity for us to learn and recognize the importance of the issue related to trafficking in persons in Malaysia, particularly from the legislative perspective. As you may already know, trafficking in persons is a global crime that trades in people and exploits them for profit. Trafficking in persons has received global attention and is significant because it relates to the violation of human rights, irrespective of gender, race, and nationality. Trafficking in person cases are increasing globally and domestically, largely involving the sexual exploitation of women and children, as well as labor exploitation, including forced labor. Before I proceed further, let us watch a video. I have prepared a short video, at least to give some ideas to I believe there are some students joining us today. So I would like to play a video on human trafficking to provide some understanding about the different elements of process that involved in the crime, as well as the different type of exploitation that may involved. Yeah. Just give me a moment. Let me share my slide as well as the video, yeah? I hope you can see my slide. Okay, great.
Yes, we can.
Sure. So this is the video. Let's watch this video and have some understanding about what is human trafficking and different types of exploitation that involved in the crime.
Over 20.9 million men, women, and children are victims of human trafficking. But do you know what human trafficking actually is? In a small sleepy town, people are dreaming. But not everyone's dreams will come true. Human traffickers prey on people's dreams and lure them away for their own benefit. How do they do this? Human trafficking doesn't happen all of a sudden. It's a process. First, traffickers act. This includes recruiting victims, transporting them to the place where they'll be exploited, hiding them from authorities, and receiving victims from other traffickers. So why don't the victims run away or say no? Because traffickers use different means. This includes threatening or forcing victims to do what they want, abducting or deceiving the victims, and abusing power. Sometimes traffickers promise small payments or benefits to get the victim to cooperate. And why are the traffickers doing this? The purpose of trafficking is exploitation. Traffickers take advantage of victims for their own profit or benefit. This is human trafficking. This man's neighbor tells him that he has a great job for him on a very safe construction site and that he'll be paid a lot of money. With more money, he can make his dreams come true. He agrees to take the job. A few days later, the neighbor's friend picks him up and they drive to the construction site. It's a very long way from his home. This man is put to work immediately without any training or protective equipment, without enough to eat or drink, and with very few breaks. After many months, he's only been paid a fraction of what he was promised. He knows he's been tricked, but he doesn't have enough money to get home. This man is a victim of human trafficking. He was recruited by his neighbor and tricked into thinking he was going to work at a safe construction site for fair pay. Instead, he was forced to work long hours in unsafe conditions for almost no money, while others benefited from his exploitation. One day, while looking for jobs online, this woman comes across an opportunity to work in a restaurant in a big city. Her application is successful, and her new employer arranges for her travel there. She is met at the airport and driven to a part of the city that looks nothing like she expected. The car pulls up to a building. The door is shut and locked behind her. She is made to perform sex acts against her will. She is trapped. This woman is a victim of human trafficking. She was transported by a trafficker from the airport to the location of the job. When she arrived at the location and realized it was not the restaurant job she was expecting, the traffickers used force to keep her there. She was then exploited for forced sex work. This 14-year-old boy on school break is approached on the street by a woman who looks trustworthy. She tells him that she needs workers at her factory, and she promises him lots of money. He brings her to meet his parents. They are so happy for him. He'll now be able to save money for school. The woman drives him to the next town. They pull up to an old building. There is someone waiting for him. As he is led inside, the nice lady drives off. The factory isn't anything like she described. There are lots of people working, including many children. He works all day, and after just a few hours of sleep, he starts again. He is sad. This isn't what he expected. He misses his family. After weeks, he still hasn't received any salary or been allowed to contact them. He is trapped. This boy is a victim of human trafficking. He was tricked by the woman who recruited him on the street. He was then received by a trafficker when he arrived at the factory and exploited by being forced to sew clothing. For anyone under the age of 18, only the act and purpose matter for it to legally be a case of human trafficking. Understanding that human trafficking doesn't happen all at once, but instead is a process of act, means, and purpose, helps us better identify victims and trafficking trends. People everywhere are dreaming and looking for opportunities to make those dreams come true. Human trafficking is happening all around us. Will you recognize it when you see it? To learn more, visit iomx.org.
So as you may see in the video provides some understanding about what is human trafficking is all about. It is actually a process that involves act, means, and purpose, and the different type of exploitation that we are talking now. I mean, like, of course, in this forum we are focusing on forced labor, but it is my duty to at least let you guys or give some understanding about the different types of exploitation that may involved as well. Yeah. It is important to note that Malaysia's strategic geographical location has somehow put the country in a unique position where it is regarded as a transit as well as destination country for economic migrants. Malaysia is a major and popular destination country among migrant workers from the Southeast Asia and South Asia due to its vast economic opportunities. At the same time, Malaysia is unfortunately considered as a destination and a transit country for trafficking in persons and smuggling of migrants. Migrant workers, who constitute more than 30% of the Malaysian workforce, are often considered as a vulnerable group to trafficking situations, particularly forced labor. Realizing the challenge and danger posed by this transnational crime, Malaysia has signed and ratified the United Nations Convention Against Transnational Crime, which often we call as UNTOC, and subsequently become the party to the protocol to prevent, suppress, and punish trafficking in persons, especially women and children, or in layman, we call it as a TIP protocol. At the regional level, we have even signed and ratified the ASEAN Convention on Trafficking in Persons, which we call as ACTIP. In line with its international obligation to combat trafficking in persons, Malaysia enacted its first anti-trafficking law in 2007, which is known as the Anti-Trafficking in Persons Act 2007. And of course, due to the ever-changing nature of this crime, the act has been amended 3 times in 2010, 2015, and 2021 with the aim of strengthening the anti-trafficking in persons legal framework, enforcement, as well as to adopt victim-centered approach in regard to protection of the trafficking victims. The amendments to ATIPSOM Act in 2010, among others, were to widen the definition of trafficking in persons to also include labor exploitation, as well as to provide harsher punishment for profits obtained from the crime. Additionally, the amendments have also strengthened the enforcement aspect of the legislation by designating the Malaysian Labour Department as the additional law enforcement agency to complement the existing enforcement agencies like the Royal Malaysian Police, Immigration Department of Malaysia, Royal Malaysian Customs, and the Malaysian Maritime Enforcement Agency. Another significant revision to the law was the criminalization of people smuggling activity, in which the Act now has begun to known as the Anti-Trafficking in Persons and Anti-Smuggling of Migrants Act, or which popularly known as ATIPSOM Act. The amendment to the ATIPSOM Act in 2015 were transformational in strengthening the protection element by allowing greater roles and functions for NGOs to provide shelter services, as well as to be protection officers to the trafficked persons. The amendments also granted the freedom of movement and opportunity for the trafficked victims to work in the country. These elements were in line with the international standards and best practices in accordance with the victim-centered approach treatment to the trafficked victims. Additionally, the revision of the law has also resulted in the establishment of a high-level committee, HLC, to oversee the efficiency and running of the Council for Anti-Trafficking in Persons and Anti-Smuggling of Migrants, MAPO, which is situated within the Ministry of Home Affairs. It falls under the purview of Ministry of Home Affairs. The amendments to ATIPSOM in 2021/22, because the Act was tabled in Parliament in 2021, December, and eventually it was gazetted in February 2022. So which means we recognize the amendments in 2022, yeah, focused on the identification of victims and improvements regarding the definition of trafficking in persons, which was aimed for better prosecution and conviction of trafficking cases. Besides, the revision of the law also focused on the prevention or deterrent aspect by providing heavier sentences to the perpetrators. Apart from ATIPSOM Act, the enforcement agencies in Malaysia also uses different law or act that available at the moment, such as Penal Code, Employment Act, Immigration Act, Passport Act, and Workers' Minimum Standards of Housing and Amenities Act, which is popularly known as the Act 441. Yeah? Ladies and gentlemen, on 31st March 2021, the National Action Plan on Anti-Trafficking in Persons 2021 till 2025, or which we know as NAPTIP 3.0, was officially launched by the Minister of Home Affairs, Malaysia. NAPTIP 3.0 is fundamentally a document that was developed to guide the direction and efforts in combating trafficking in persons in Malaysia. The NAPTIP 3.0 clearly explained the country's vision, guiding principles, strategic goals, with respecting corresponding activities in its anti-TIP efforts for the next 5 years. On 26 November 2021, the government launched the National Action Plan on Forced Labor, a specific document for forced labor itself, which was developed by the Ministry of Human Resources through a consultative process with relevant stakeholders from the government agencies, employers association, trade union, international organizations, as well as civil society organizations. The National Action Plan on Forced Labor was developed in line with NAPTIP 3.0, as well as the National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights, which is currently being developed by the Legal Affairs Division of the Prime Minister's Department. The National Action Plan on Forced Labor focuses on the awareness, enforcement, labor migration, as well as access to remedy and support services to eliminate forced labor in Malaysia. The National Action Plan on Forced Labor marks the government's resolute commitment to work collaboratively with those who share the same goals of eliminating the use of any and all forms of forced labor in Malaysia. One of the most significant and historic moments in Malaysia's fight against trafficking in persons and forced labor is the successful ratification of the International Labour Organization's Forced Labor Convention, which is known as the Protocol 29, on March 2022. For record, Malaysia is the 5th country in the Asia Pacific and the 2nd country in ASEAN to ratify this protocol. With the ratification, the government has significantly strengthened its stance to prevent forced labor, protect workers, uphold their rights, and ensure their access to justice. Last but not least, Malaysia has also become a Pathfinder country with Alliance 8.7, which is a global partnership to work on enhancing efforts to eradicate forced labor, modern slavery, and child labor around the country. In line with this, the government has made significant efforts in collaborating with various stakeholders, including source countries for migrant workers, as well as forming strategic partnership with related countries to address forced labor. Ladies and gentlemen, it is important to highlight that Malaysia has a strong legal framework and policies in place to combat trafficking in persons, including forced labor in the country. However, strong legal framework without proper implementation or execution is useless. Therefore, in line with the theme of this forum, it is opportune for us to have a constructive discussion to support Malaysia's effort in combating trafficking in persons effectively. Once again, I would like to thank the organizer for the opportunity to speak in this forum. And if you have any questions related to the legal framework in Malaysia, you may ask me later. With that, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ravi, for a very interesting and timely presentation. Certainly, knowing about the efforts by the government when it comes to combating trafficking in persons and forced labor is useful. But as you pointed out in your conclusion, government alone cannot solve this problem. It is a holistic approach, and that's why we have representatives from other areas as well with us. And so I'll move on to our next speaker for today. Datuk Shamsuddin Bardan is the Executive Director of the Malaysian Employers Federation. So as the Executive Director of the MEF, he recommends policies to be pursued by MEF in ensuring that the private sector in Malaysia operates in a more business-friendly environment, so as to ensure the private sector employers remain competitive. So I believe in his presentation, Datuk will look at the issues from the perspective of the employers. So some of the issues he will touch on are related to recruitment agencies, the responsibility of the company owners and their subordinates, hiring of migrant workers, providing appropriate living and working conditions for migrant workers, and retention of documents. So Datuk Shamsuddin, you have been given 15 minutes to present your viewpoints. The floor is yours. Datuk, would you like to share any slides? Or?
Yeah, thank you very much, Professor Adnan and Dr. Ravi Mahalingam and fellow panelists. And of course, thank you very much to the organizers for actually giving me this opportunity to share issues on trafficking, especially from the employer's point of view. Basically, of course, if you look at my slides, mostly it relates to the legal framework, which was very much touched upon by Dr. Mahalingam in his speech. So I wouldn't actually belabor on those particular issues that had been touched by Dr. Mahalingam. So I'm going to possibly touch on other issues here. And of course, when you talk about labor issues, as far as forced labor is concerned, of course, it is not just limited to migrant workers. It is also affecting the local workers. But of course, in this context, in Malaysia, we had not seen any cases where there is complaint on forced labor by the local workers. But yes, there are a lot of issues as far as migrant workers are concerned, whether they are legal or illegal migrant workers, they are all facing the same situation. And this happened in all sectors of the economy, affecting everybody. And of course, there are a lot of issues about the kind of things that can actually befall on the migrant workers that are being trafficked in. And of course, one of the more important parts is that when you talk about the legal framework, which was also touched by Dr. Mahalingam, is very, I would say we have a comprehensive legal provision, legal framework, but of course I would agree totally with Dr. Mahalingam to say that, you have the laws alone, it's not comprehensive, it's not going to be effective unless it is being enforced clearly. Yeah, and of course, talking about enforcement, ladies and gentlemen, of course, we know that our neighboring countries' laws on trafficking in is very much similar to what Malaysia have, that is in Singapore. But Singapore has the willpower to enforce the law very, very strictly. And of course, you can see that as far as Singapore is concerned, I would say that, the would-be traffickers are not, I would say, daring enough to bring in any illegal migrants to Singapore. And of course, the illegal migrants that would like to go to Singapore also don't want to take that kind of risk, because of course the penalty and the enforcement of the law is very, very strictly done at our side. So here, of course, I think one of the major things, perhaps, if the country wish to move forward and stamp out illegal trafficking person, is the strict enforcement of the law. Yeah, and of course, if you look at what happened recently, and also for the past 1 year, Malaysia doesn't score very much, in a high level as far as trafficking in person report of US is concerned. We are actually being downgraded from tier 2 watch list to tier 3 now, and of course, it is really an irony in the sense that when we are host of many of the foreign workers in the country, our tip standing is even lower than some of the sending countries. So one of the issues is basically enforcement of the law. Yeah, how do we prosecute the alleged offenders? And even if we prosecute, what is the rate of conviction, and also the kind of penalty imposed by the authorities? So those kind of report need to be really be submitted to the international bodies like the tip report of US itself, so that they are clearer on the kind of efforts taken by the government to actually stamp out illegal trafficking. Yeah, and of course, when we talk about enforcement itself, I would say that a lot more can be done to actually increase the enforcement efforts, and also secure better conviction, and also send out the right message to the would-be offenders and also the traffickers, that actually the country is very serious in trying to stamp out this issue. Yeah, of course, we see that we have our federal constitution, the highest law in the country, that actually provides for prohibition of slavery and forced labor. Yeah, and that I would say is a very strong provision. But like I said earlier, it's a question of whether we are actually trying to enforce all these things. I would not dwell very much on the APTIP SOM. Yeah, this was done was touched by Dr. Mahalingam earlier. Yeah, and of course, the recent provision of the amendment in the Employment Act do provide for the offences and penalties as far as forced labor is concerned. Yeah, and of course, in this particular case, I would say that the penalty is, I would say, can be considered as high, and of course, it also involves a penalty of up to 100,000 ringgit, and also, of course, there is a possibility of jail term of both of up to 2 years in the event there is a conviction on this particular issue. So, but what we can see here is basically a provision now being provided for in the Employment Act, where the employer actually is employing people based on forced labor practices. Yeah. So this I think will make it I would say easier for the Labor Department to actually go after the offenders as far as forced labor is concerned, so that actually eventually then of course Malaysia can have a better record as far as the issues of forced labor is concerned. Basically, of course, I think one should have to look at the root cause of these issues on forced labor. Yeah, I would say that from the employer's point of view, the cost of recruitment is really considered as very prohibitive. Yeah. If you're talking about the current cost of recruitment, say for example from Bangladesh, the cost at the source country can go as high as 15,000 ringgit, and that is not including the costs that would be incurred by the employer in the country itself. So I would say that it is not too far-fetched if employers say that actually to engage a legal foreign worker, say from Bangladesh, it may cost even up to 20,000 ringgit per person. So with that kind of high cost, of course, it's going to be very, very difficult for the employers to really say that, yes, then of course, the workers can have freedom of, say, for example, to choose the other employers in Malaysia, things like that. It is purely, I would say, not practical. And of course, the other part is that when we talk about the cost, that cost actually arises because of the practices at the source country itself. Yeah, I would say that to charge even up to 15,000 for one foreign worker to come to Malaysia is far too excessive. Then, of course, recently we had some, I would say, instances where there is the arrangement between government and government to bring in foreign worker from Bangladesh, for example. The cost at the source country is basically about 4,000 ringgit only. Yes, so you can see that the cost of 4,000 ringgit based on G2G arrangement, and the cost of about 15,000 ringgit based on commercial practices. Yeah, so that, I would say, is something that possibly the government need to relook at the practices and perhaps go more for the G2G rather than relying on the supply of labor from agents, things like that. Yeah, and of course the other part is that this is really something that is beyond the control of the employers. Yeah, when a foreign worker actually come to Malaysia, they are actually limited to a specific sector. They are restricted to that, and also restricted to a particular employer. Assuming that the employer has some problems, some issues, and they would like to actually allow the worker to work for someone else. That is currently not possible. Even sometimes for intercompany, actually transfer of the foreign worker is so not possible. So this is something that I would say the government need to relook at that practices, whether it is practical for the employer to send back this particular employee when they have issues, they have problems, or rather it should be allowed, the workers should be allowed to be used by or to be employed by some other employers. So this is something that I think the government has to really look at very hard and see whether it can be facilitated that these workers be allowed to continue working in Malaysia, things like that. And of course, when the issue about employees or the foreign worker being limited to one particular employer arises, then of course the question is that how do we address this issue? Yeah. Of course, like I said earlier, the employer had incurred a very high cost as far as recruitment of foreign worker is concerned. And of course, it would not be fair, and it would not be equitable if the first employer that actually had spent, say, about 20,000 to bring in the worker, and suddenly this worker is allowed the freedom to choose other employer. So because one of the issue as far as forced labor is concerned is freedom to choose the employer. So in that kind of situation, mechanism has to be drawn up in the sense that the first employer need to be compensated with, I would say, equitably for the cost he had incurred to bring in the worker. At least the prospective employer that wishes to engage this person must be made to pay some of the expenditure, or I would say on a proportionate basis, thing like that. So if we are able to do that, then possibly the issues on forced labor can be really being reduced. And of course, the other part is basically related to cost again, yeah, and of course. The government may want to look, and also the stakeholders may want to look what happened in Europe, for example. In Europe, the migrant workers actually come to a particular country at their own cost. There is no cost involved or incurred by the employer, and in that sense, the worker has every right, every I would say opportunity to just look for the most suitable employer. And even if the first employer is not suitable, then he should be allowed to move on to the second worker, to second employer, thing like that. So in that kind of thing, of course, then the issues about the employee or the foreign worker being limited to a particular employer can be resolved. Now, so long I would say that we are stuck with the current practice, it's going to be very difficult for us to really eliminate the issues about forced labor, thing like that. And of course, again, when we talk about the high cost of recruitment, thing like that, the foreign workers that would like to come to Malaysia also may be thinking that why should I pay that much to the agent, even though we have now the process of what we call it a zero cost recruitment. Really, in practice, whether that is really effective, because we still hear stories, we still hear issues like the foreign workers at the source country still have to pay a lot more money to the agents at that site. Yeah, so in that sense, I would say that it is also incumbent on the international bodies like ILO, for example, to actually educate and of course raise the awareness with the government of the source country or even the stakeholders in the source country to facilitate the movement of their citizen to third country. So long as we are actually not able to do that, and the would-be foreign workers are being charged excessively, then I would say that then people may take the alternative. Why should I go to the formal side of migration? Then I'll just try to go informally. That's mean another use illegal agents to come to the country, thing like that. And in that sense, of course, that it leads to trafficking in. Yeah. So that I think is something that we need to really address the issue. And of course, again, another part is that when we talk about the processes of applying and also trying to recruit foreign workers in the country itself, of course, we have a lot of issues in the sense that, it is just like being on and off kind of thing. So unfortunately, when the authorities say you cannot actually bring in new foreign workers for this period or for 1 year or 2 years, but then employers need to still continue the business. So how do you continue the business when you don't have the workers? So possibly in that sense, when there is supply and there is demand for illegal workers, then of course this kind of situation will still be perpetuated. So I would say that foreign workers that wish to come to the country must be facilitated at the lowest cost possible. And the employers that wish to employ foreign workers also must be facilitated at the lowest cost possible. So in that kind of situation, then issues about exploitation, and things like that will be eliminated. I think that should be the desire of the stakeholders in trying to stem out issues of illegal migration, things like that. I would say that perhaps I just would like to stop here now, and possibly later on we can discuss further. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Shamsuddin. Very interesting perspective, particularly the dilemma between the high cost of hiring the employees and the employees' freedom to choose employer. I mean, this is certainly an issue that we need to look into. And your suggestion of government-to-government approach is something as well to look into. So I suppose we can move on to our next speaker, Mr. Mohammed Effendi bin Abdul Ghani. Mr. Mohammed is president of the Malaysian Trade Union Congress. So I believe that in his presentation, he will focus mostly on the trade union's role in supporting decent work, representing workers in labor disputes, collective bargaining, and social dialogue processes to tackle this problem. So the adequacy of the Trade Union Act, the Employment Act could be as well drawn upon. Also looking into giving migrant workers voice, freedom of association, and simplify the procedure to recognize new trade unions. And also, very importantly, the need for more regular labor inspections. So with this said, Mr. Mohammed Effendi, you have 15 minutes to present your viewpoints. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Brother Moderator, Dr. Adnan. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum and very good mornings, all the panelists. First of all, thank you very much for giving this opportunity to MTUC for me to share our view, especially on the trade union rules in supporting decent work, representing workers and labor dispute, collective bargaining, and social dialogue process to tackle the problems. So when you're talking about the trade union rules in supporting decent work, in 2013, MTUC with its support of ILO organized a national conference, participated more than 100 trade union leaders all over the country to discuss roadmaps towards the ratifications of ILO Convention 87 and full interventions of the Conventions 98. The meeting adapted to set up a task force to work on ratifications of the Convention 87 and full implementations of the Convention 98. As a follow-up with above and a task force comprising 30 principal MTUC officials and selected a senior trade union representative, including divisions leader, attend the meetings together with the ILO representative and the MTUC leader. Subsequently, in 2017, MTUC also together with the ILO again prepared the MTUC priorities on the DWCP, it means Decent Work Country Programs. As a result of that, the tripartite concluded as a Malaysia Decent Work Country Program for 2019 to 2025, and it was signed in Geneva in the ILC conference in June 2019 between MTUC, MEF, and MOHR ministers by the Minister of Human Resources at that time, YB Kula. There's three parts of country priorities. One is about right at works, protecting and strengthening rights at works. Second is the future of work, strengthening national capacities to meet the needs of current and future works. And the third one is labor migrations, strengthening labor migration governance. MTUC would like prefer a decent work country program and suitable developments to be included. The country is in the process of implementing the NAPFL, as I mentioned by Dato' Sam as before, is a national action plan against forced labor, which is addressing all the issue we are discussing beautifully. And based on the technical committee meeting with the MOHR on the implementations of the NAPFLs, we are briefed that all the important legal frameworks that need to work together to prevent a forced labor issue are being addressed one at a time. expedited amendments also on the Trade Union Acts and also the E-Employment Acts are primary examples. Secondly, MTC also we are representing the workers in labor dispute. MTC we have 14 divisions in the state to represent workers in a labor dispute. Even the MTC main priority is to provide a service to our affiliates, but we also provide representations of the labor court, industrial relation department, and industrial court via the industrial relation practitioner who are either working direct with the individual unions or with the MTC itself. This entire technical and defense is prepared by this IRP for the workers. Then about the collective bargaining and social dialogue process. Quality bargaining process is a bipartite process. Currently, we don't have any major problem in concluding the collective agreements between the unions and their respective employer. In this event, a dispute arises between the union and the employer, as mentioned in the industrial court. Mentioned in the Industrial Act, we will refer to the Industrial Relations Department for the consultations or to resolve this matter amicably. And the social dialogue process is working well. We do have a case where there is a breakdown in the process, and the matter is then referred to the arbitrations to the Industrial Relations Court to hand down award after the complete contemplations on the issue raised by the both sides. And also about the adequacy in the Trade Union Act. Currently, we have several restrictions on the Trade Union Act as far as the freedom of association is concerned. And I think in 2018, the government, with the assistance of ILO, has been working closely with the MTUC. We try to reform the three major acts. Among them is the Trade Union Act. We believe that this law reform is related to TPPA at that time, and subsequently now for the CPTPP. In this amendment, MTC has proposed to the government to reform the Trade Union Act to be a conformity with the Convention 87. And last and latest one in 2022, I think in last month, the government tabled the amendments of the Trade Union Act bills in the parliaments, and it passed the amendment, which of the amendments are in a conformity with 87. Unfortunately, after the parliament passing the law and before it could be endorsed for the implementations, the parliament was dissolved. I think this is the things that we are hoping that we have the law in place with our concern taken in account as soon as possible. It's a long due. As you know that also on this amendment for Trade Union Act, I think there's some mixed feelings among a few unions because they are concerned about the multiplicity of the unions, but still we believe that there has a delegate conference as before, as a previous leadership that already approved to propose to government to ratify the fully Convention 87. But still, we hope that after our general election that we can have continued discussion with the governments how to implement this Trade Union Act without any issue, and then we also need a specific procedure to control on the multiplicity. And talking about the Employment Act, I think is very bad or very sad news for the employees because it was postponing 4 days before the implementation on the 1st of September. The Employment Act was amended even through it not fully expected by the MTUC because we are seeing progress so far as a protection to all workers are concerned. We believe the government could come up with the further additional protections where we give to all employees immaterials of their income, including the protections to the workers in the informal economy. As example, like as the gig workers, gig economy, and we believe that there are about 2.5 million Malaysian workers now. They are working in this sector, and there are need of the protections. But the good things is the EA does not differentiate between local and migrant workers. But the issue often raised in terms of access to justice, as migrants are more fearful to reach out, and we have an increasing rate of xenophobia in Malaysia that makes matter worse. And also to giving the migrant workers a voice. I think this is also part of role on MTC, because the environment in which the migrant workers are working are very vulnerable, because they are here to work for a temporary period. And we have received numbers of complaints from migrant workers concerning accessing their right to work and also to join unions. The restriction that we have observed are the law and the practices. The reason is if the employer choose to terminate the contract of workers, he shall do so. Just bring the passport of the migrant workers to the immigration office and terminate his contract and send back to the country of origin in the next flight. So in such situations, it's immensely difficult for the migrant workers to raise their grievances related to the employment and the conditions of work, such as health and safety and living conditions. Because of all this issue, we have a migrant resource center in MTUC that focuses entirely on assisting the migrant workers. The scope of the MRC include awareness raising, case management. We have training and also organize workers into trade unions. Since 2020, we have assisted over 40,000 migrant workers and trained over 500 workers in labor on labor right, and trade unionism and sex harassment and forced labor, financial literacy, and more. MRC actively does online outreach in MTC in order to reach a large number of workers. And MRC has consistently distributed MRC flyers to over 2 million workers in the total, and in terms of organized, close to 100,000 workers to have been organized into trade unions. And second last about the freedom associations, MTC believes has always been advocate of the simplifications of the procedure to recognize new trade unions, but accept a request. There's straightforward recognitions upon fulfillment of the formation's conditions are not heeded yet. But we recognize that the change just in the calculations method during the secret ballot is a step forward to make things easier and fairer to the unions. Means that 50+1 in the box of method. But this is things still in discussion, because what we opinion to the government that this is really talking about the FOA is these things about to enhance or to improve the IRA, International Regional Act, more on about the secret ballot, how to get the recognition of the unions. On the issue of the multiplicity, I think the government has go ahead and made the amendment to be in line with ILO Convention 97. But in the other right, that there's a few unions that are really not very comfortable and very concerning about the multiplicity. But we believe that more engagement with the union, with these governments, we can have strengthening the implementation of the multiplicity or freedom of associations. And I believe that when we have a specific procedure to control the multiplicity, then I think these things can be proceed as usual, or can be proceed smoothly. But seeing the parliament has been dissolved, there's no telling how long more to the gazetting implementation to going to take on these amendments. And last is about the need for the regular labor inspections. This is a extremely challenging issue for not only labor inspectors in our country, but also in the regions. The reason is we have too many, about almost 1 million company registered, big, medium, and also small, and micro industry registered in our country with less than 1,000 labor inspectors working on the various tasks on a daily basis. We like to prefer the government to think about the alternative way to implement labor inspections with the issue of the technology. Our proposal will be agreed by the MOSHAR in 2018. In principle, is for MTUC and our affiliate to become the eyes and ears to MOSHAR concerning labor inspections. And also on the multi occasions, we have urged very strongly for DOL, Department of Labor, be equipped enough workers in order for them to keep up and be able to enforce the law in their view. I think that's all, Dr. Adnan, regarding our view on this from the MTC. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Muhammad Effendi. I really appreciate. I think your points as well are very valid and slightly different than from what we have heard earlier on. Certainly, you have pointed to certain weaknesses in the law, in the practices. While we all have the same aim, we all want to see migrant workers protected. We all want to see the end of trafficking. I suppose the approach to the end may differ. So this is a wonderful opportunity to have this dialogue and present our viewpoints. Thanks very much, Mr. Muhammad Effendi. So I'll move on to our next speaker, Ms. Ka-Ia Lim, who is a senior program manager at the Responsible Business Alliance. So Ms. Lim is trained in law, but her real interest is in human spirit and education. It is my understanding that Ms. Lim will present on the responsibility of the private sector, in particular the business community, in tackling the problem. So this could include adequacy of the laws. So the discussion would certainly include adequacy of the laws and the regulation in mandatory accountability and reporting duties of companies and other areas as well that Ms. Lim deems appropriate. So without any further ado, I would like to invite Ms. Lim to present for 15 minutes. But just before you begin, Ms. Lim, can I just remind everyone, if you have any questions, you can write your questions in the chat, or you can reserve your question and pose them later on during the Q&A time. You can raise your digital hand later and you will be allowed to ask questions to any of the presenters. Ms. Lim, please go ahead.
Thank you, Professor Adnan, for the introduction. And also, first of all, thank you to Monash University for this invitation. I understand I have 15 minutes, so I'll just be aware of the timing. I do not have a PowerPoint presentation today, but maybe I can just provide a sort of high-level overview of what the Responsible Business Alliance does in terms of providing solutions to the issues that we've been talking about today. So for many of you who may not know who the Responsible Business Alliance is, we are basically a non-profit organization that is based in Washington, DC, but we do have an office, several offices around the region in Asia, Europe, as well as Latin America as well. So we do have a specific office in Kuala Lumpur, mainly because, as you know, there are a significant challenges facing issues on forced labor. So we predominantly look at forced labor aspects and work with our members who are mostly from the electronics companies globally. So they do have supply chain that are based in Southeast Asia, but also Asia. So which is why it is so important for us to have an office in Kuala Lumpur to be able to work with our supply chain to mitigate and eradicate issues on forced labor. So, but first of all, just to go back, the mission of our organization is basically to provide values to businesses, planet, and people. So when you look at that, obviously, business and human rights is a huge pillar in what we do. And unlike most panel speakers who have talked about tips on, the Employment Act in Malaysia, we are more guided towards International Labor Organization. Most of the conventions that we look at on labor issues, the UN Guiding Principles on Human Rights and Business, but also the Organization for European Cooperation and Development. So it's more of a international standards that we look at. But on the other hand, we are a self-regulated organization, which means, there is no legally binding obligation in terms for our members. It's solely self-regulated through a code of conduct, which our members revise every 3 years. So maybe just going back to the core of it, everything that we do is basically guided by this code of conduct. And so we started in 2008, where we do have a pool of 5 to 6, electronics companies that have come together to say that why not, we come up with a self-regulated body that can provide not just a code, but also support in terms of tools and resources, capacity building, whatever that's needed to support the industry to abide by these standards that will bring value to their business, people, but also planet. And as it evolve, our membership has, I think now we have 200 over members, and they still look at the code of conduct as an evolving document. So again, I mentioned earlier that every 3 years, we do have a revision of the code. And what we do is we look at other industry standards and other international standards so that we are up to date with our code of conduct in regard to, protection of human rights, but also the environment. And once we do this, so it is an opportunity for members then to see, okay, what are also the issues that's facing, emerging issues that's facing workers, but also employers in the supply chain, and can we actually enhance the code? So once the code is done, we also ask the question of how can we then, ensure compliance? Not only compliance, how do we then make it operational? So it's not just a theoretical document, but we also need to make sure that it's something that can be measured, and we can also what we call auditable. So some of you who know RBA may actually know us more in terms of our audit protocol. So what we do is once you become a member of the RBA, we do have different level of membership. We have 4 levels basically, which is the lowest is supporter, and then there's affiliate, followed by regular, and then full membership. So once a company decides to be a member of RBA, obviously they do go through a process of screening, and then they do get approved by a board in terms of their membership. But at the same time, they do have a choice of participating either as a supporter, affiliate, regular, or full. And what this means is certain companies may not be fully equipped or prepared to adopt or implement all the code of conducts. And therefore, they can still be a supporter. There's no obligation for them to actually comply with the code fully, but there should be a commitment for them to wanting to improve. So it's a little bit like the UN. If you look at it, when you have the process of ratification and stuff like that, member states sometimes may not be ratifying the convention, but still there should be a commitment in terms of progressing towards achieving full ratification. So similarly, our membership is the same, but we do hold regular and full members in compliance to our code. And not only that, they also are obliged to trickle that compliance to at least the first tier of the supply chain. So when this happens, what we can do is do enforce the code on regular and full members by requiring them not only to conduct audit every 2 years. So our audit are only valid for 2 years, but after every 2 years, they do have to do another audit to ensure that they are permanently or progressing towards compliance. And in this regard, they will also then require their first tier supplier to do the same. And through this audit, that's where we are able to assess risk to actually work with the auditees in terms of performing corrective action before they can actually fully close the audit. So so I'm actually working with the compliance team at the moment. We do obviously do more than just audit. For instance, we do address allegations that comes from external stakeholders. It could be a civil society, it could be an activist, or it could be other international watchdog organizations that is monitoring activities on the ground. So when allegations come to us and it does involve a regular or full member, then we do consider it as a compliance matter. In this sense, what we do is we must require the company or the member to address the allegations, and we would actually then provide recommendations in terms of what actions they need to do to fully close or address the allegations. So the other, I think, mechanism that we do look at is obviously workers' feedback. It's absolutely important because like I'm sure that everybody here is aware that while we do have a mechanism or a code of conduct in place, it is inevitably impossible to be able to, monitor every single of our members. And sometimes what we do is we rely on the workers to actually provide feedback. In this sense, we do have something that we call RBA Voices, which has been launched, I think, 2 years ago. And I think what happened with COVID-19 as a pandemic has really driven RBA to look at worker feedback really seriously. Because before that, we didn't really have an RBA Voices. But once COVID hit, and we do notice that workers become invisible because of the lockdown, with the closure of borders and factories being closed, there's no visibility to the workers at all. And therefore, we feel that it's important to provide this access so that workers can actually be the one who inform, RBA if there are issues that are faced on the ground with the employers. So I think apart from all this, again, I mentioned that a code and also audit is as good as it gets when, members are actually complying, or not just complying because it is something that they have to do, but also there should be a change of mindset that this is something right to do. So not something that they have to do, but something that you should be doing because it's the right thing. And therefore, we feel that it's important to continuously not just hold a whip, but also provide support to our members, but it extends to the supplier as well. So a lot over the years, we've actually provided training, but not just training itself. We have literally provide what many consultation companies would have done, to spending hours and hours sitting with a company who have issues in their workforce, and work with them on how do you actually start creating policy, but not just policy, but something that they can work on. Also promoting, more engagement between employers and their workers in order to also raise that awareness with the workers on their rights. So all in all, with all this, we hope that obviously, again, as I mentioned, it is still a self-regulated body, but we have seen impact being done. So far, the RBA has managed to work with our members in the supply chain to reimburse more than $70 million to workers up to date. And this figure is increasing more and more every day as we work with more members in the supply chain to remediate. So again, I hope that this provide a little bit of insight to not, how we are working towards achieving impact. And it's not something where we have the tool, but it doesn't, result in providing remedy to workers. With that, I'll stop, and I look forward to further discussion and engagement on this topic.
Thank you so much, Ms. Lim. It's really good to know that RBA looks beyond mere compliance and the audit, as you mentioned, every 2 years. And the real question is, how do we change the attitude, that when it comes to compliance, from simply complying to do it because it's the right thing to do, as you noted. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your presentation. So we'll move on now to our second last presentation today. So Mr. Abdulaziz bin Ismail will be our next presenter. He is the founding member of the Selangor Anti-Human Trafficking Council. So Mr. Abdulaziz will present on, will point out some of the gaps within the law and migrant workers' rights in relation to forced labor trafficking, including immigration and labor issues based on his experience in the field. So, Mr. Abdulaziz, 15 minutes are yours. The floor is yours. Please go ahead.
Good morning to everybody and Assalamualaikum. On the ground that we, in a few cases that we do, we feel that we just cannot solve the problem within this next 20 years, just because that currently we have about 4 million what these labor traffic victims term as illegal immigrants. This is what we had when we met the Home Ministry officials in July 2015. At a material of time, we were informed that 6.7 million migrant workers in Malaysia and 1.8 million is termed as legals and 4.9 is illegals. So out of the 4.9 million, when we go through the database, we check that 90% of them were brought in legally into this country to companies without business infrastructure. They paid exorbitant recruitment fees to come to Malaysia as high as 20,000. Right? But upon arrival, their document was confiscated. And then when they challenge in court, they lose because they were obligated in the immigration laws. Because the bogus employees. When we see about 400, it is estimated that 512,315 companies without business infrastructure were given the approval to bring in the migrant workers. And what we see today, the authorities will reuse, not to spare the AG chambers and also the Anti-Corruption Commission. They misuse the Ethics Home Act Section 51(3)(b)(2), meaning that even though legal workers, when they did not establish you as a traffic victim, you will place in the detention center. Even you have a valid permit, working permit. Now, to those who, what I see today, you just cannot. Talking about the recruitment fee paid by the employers, I don't think so, because it was paid by the employee itself. The migrant workers was not given justice, access to justice, such as they were restricted to under Employment Restriction Act under Section 5, in which they are not legal workers, even though they were brought in legally, just because the employers failed to extend their employment pass. So talking about labor inspectors, when we file a case of claims, it's not the issue of labor inspectors. They can go on ad hoc basis, in which when the complaint they receive, there is a violation of Passport Act, violation of Labor Act, violation of Industrial Relation Act, violation of the Active Zone, and other related, even money laundering. But of course, they were not given the opportunity. When you talk about They cannot prove. They were asked to prove themselves. The burden of proof to have their documentation on them. Of course, when their document was confiscated, they cannot prove. I just want to share some of you of my cases that I did. 153 migrant workers, school leavers, high school, were brought into this country legally. And they were promised to be in the electronic factory. Unfortunately, they ended up in the bird nest factory. They were not paid for 10 months. They were only paid 37 ringgit to upkeep their women hygiene and 3 meals a day, work up to 14 hours a day. When they complained over unpaid wages, they were detained and arrested for abuse of employment pass because they were brought in by a company without business relationship, a company, and they were employed, direct employed by the B company, so they cannot claim. So 103 workers and 104 workers in Malacca also paid the same thing because the prime law in this country towards migrant workers is the immigration laws. That's why they cannot move. They never get their justice. And a few cases that we forwarded to the MAPO itself, that unpaid wages for 11 years with legal permit, and MAPO shy away from the problem. And then we wrote to the AG chambers, provide some representation to the AG. They shy away. Not only the migrant workers, the seamen, all the, and for your information, the first 2 years, when I was the, I managed to recover more than 1 million unpaid wages of the illegal and legal migrants for the past 2.5 years, just after the, just before the pandemic, and as at today, I managed to secure. So what I see today, you can never reduce or solve this problem unless it's going to be a total structural reform on this issue. Because we have about what the state term, their victim, 4.4 million of the labor traffic victim, they term as illegal immigrants. You can never solve this problem unless there will be a, with the technology today, we can reduce the recruitment fees and then direct with all the technology, with the digital technology, you can establish the chain of perpetrators if you want to. But when you go to the labor department, they will apply ERA, or they should investigate if there is a bogus employer. We brought to them, there is bogus employers employ them. So they should refer these cases to other agencies, not within the perimeter of their authorities, but they fail to do it. So today, more than 1 million of workers. And then when we talk about to reduce or to combat this, you need to come up with a structural reform, because number one, our detention camp is only capable of 88,000 per at any one time to house the migrant workers who will be detained. And I did approach the MTUC, they shy away from us. We call up the MAPO, they shy from us. And then for your information, once we established in 2010, the MAPMAS, we have very strong protecting the state from being down into tier 2 watch list. You can see our report in USP in 2011 and 2012, how we protect the state. But after that, we just unable to do it just because we never reduced the problems of this issue. So I think that Dr. Rawi can answer this on this. And on the in terms of Samsudin, talking about the recruitment fees paid by the employers. I don't think so. If they were paid, the employees paid 20,000 and the employers paid the net 20,000, that's 40,000 on the recruitment fees. I don't think so. So I think quite misleading on this issue. And then I hopefully that what we wrote to the MACO for the past 3 years, we requested to establish that about 33 government agencies, ministries, and private sector that participate, facilitate, and benefited from this labor trafficking. I hope that what I raised today should be taken into account how we reduce this one, because the law is quite comprehensive, but we misuse it to the interest of the perpetrators, not to the best interest of the migrant workers. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Abdulaziz, for sharing your personal experience in dealing with these cases. And I'm sure our colleagues will be able to respond to some of your questions that you have raised. So I'll move on to our last speaker for today. Last but not least is Ms. Priya Sharma. In fact, Ms. Priya Sharma is she needs to be credited for organizing today's event. This is her PhD topic, and she's about to complete it in a month or two. Priya will be, I think her focus will be on what we call 3P paradigm, right? On prosecution of the trafficking perpetrators, protection of the victims of trafficking, as well as the prevention, because prevention is better than cure. So, Priya, I pass on the floor to you for 15 minutes.
Can I share screen?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. And I would like to thank everybody for giving giving us their perspectives. And I agree that this issue is a really difficult issue, and it's such a multifaceted problem that we it requires multi-stakeholders to come together to solve this issue. So I will just quickly give you 15 minutes of just very general issues that I have found, and what I'm trying to do is to relate it to your presentations as well, and highlight some of the issues that I thought were important when I looked at this issue. So this whole topic. So as Dr. Anand just said, my PhD research is based on the 3P, and the 3P is the benchmark that I used simply because it is the benchmark that measures the trafficking in persons reports, and it is also encouraged by the Parliament Protocol, which actually serves as a core reference to our principal legislation, which is the Anti-Trafficking in Persons Act. So I look at it from the perspective of prosecution, protection, and prevention. And the methodology that I've used is the doctrinal legal research, where I look at laws, I interpret the words, I look at case law and judgments and judicial interpretation. But I will not be going to judicial interpretation because I think it will take a really long time. So I will just look at the laws and see from these three perspectives. So when you look at prosecution of trafficking or forced labor itself, we find it in section 2, like Datuk Shamsuddin has laid out, right? That what trafficking means, all actions involved in acquiring and maintaining the labor or services through coercion, and includes the act of recruiting and conveying and transferring and harboring and providing and receiving a person So there are three main areas that is important here, which is the actus reus, the mens rea, and the purpose of it, which is also something Dr. Ravi spoke about. So I just want to highlight one thing when it comes to actus reus. So when you look at the at section 2, we would also remember that, as Dr. Ravi said, that in 2010 this definition was amended and the term was expanded to include all actions involved in acquiring or maintaining the labor or services. So this proposed amendment actually came in response to the Trafficking in Persons report back in 2010, which revealed that many Malaysian labor outsourcing companies recruited excess workers who were then often subject to conditions of forced labor. So but from my research, what I found is, despite the amendment to the definitions, there are still legal issues surrounding this recruitment of migrant workers through outsourcing of companies. Especially, for example, an employer can also be a labor contractor who provides workers for labor to various individuals or companies, and these are known as outsourcing. They are known as outsourcing agencies that could be both a recruitment agent as well as an employer. And the Employment Act actually lays out the definition of the contractor for labor. Now, the main concern here is that outsourcing of the management of migrant workers to agencies shield principal employers from accountability for workplace harms or grievances or exploitation. And as we also know, back in March 2019, the government enforced a ban on Malaysian-based outsourcing companies, following numerous complaints. And in its place, the recruitment of migrant workers is now managed by private employment agencies under the Private Employment Agencies Act 1981. But I just want to highlight something here. So if you notice this particular section, section 3, which looks at recruitment, it says that basically a private employment agency is a body corporate, number one, and is granted a license to carry on recruitment activities. So recruitment means activities which have been carried out by any person, and it could be an offer to look for an employment, offer of employment, or obtain an employment for a job seeker, or offer to look for an employee, offer an employee. That's what I highlighted, or obtain an employee for an employer. And there have been several arguments here that the phrase offer an employee allows the private employment agency to provide their own employees instead of workers to be employed by the employer of the workplace. So this phrase, in a way, attempts to transform private employment agencies into contractors for labor, allowing them to supply their own employees in a sense. So as a response to this, there have been, I believe the MTUC, trade unions, and the civil society as well have submitted that it's necessary to call upon the abolition of the contractor for labor system, and any employment, or ensuring that all workers at any workplace must be direct employees of the factory or the workplace employers. So this is one of the issues that I think involved are extremally important when we look at how foreign workers come in and how they end up being trapped in forced labor, which is what Mr. Abdul Aziz also looked at. So that is just one small issue that I wanted to highlight. And another thing that I wanted to highlight was this, that when you look at the purpose of this act, right, which is to eliminate forced labor, we know that the ATIPSOM does not define exploitation, but it instead provides an open-ended list of examples of forced labor, and which includes forced labor. So as a legal concept, forced labor has not been defined by any legislation, but what we now have is this definition under the Employment Act, which is section 90B. So I believe this inclusion of forced labor is a welcome development, and it's really a good move. But I find that there are several issues with the definition that is problematic. firstly, I have a problem with the usage of the term employer and employee. I mean, like Dr. Shamsuddin mentioned, when you look at the definition of forced labor, he specifically mentioned any person. So I think that term any person is inclusive, it's broader, and it's not as narrow as employer and employee, because this now indicates that the measurement of forced labor is limited to a formal employment relationship, which I think is really what it does is it leaves out those that are trapped in forced labor in the informal sector of the economy. And this is known to occur in Malaysia, where work is untaxed, it's unregulated, and it's actually harder for labor inspections to reach, right? So then what happens is we are establishing migrants as a class of worker to which a largely different set of rules apply. So I think this is an important issue. And secondly, what we see here is that, this falls short of a comprehensive approach as we see in the ILO definition, because it does not extend to involuntary work, right? So if you look here, you see to do any activity, service, or work. So in that sense, there are a range of cases that are likely to that are not included, especially more subtle forms of forced labor exploitation, and this could be forced overtime, financial penalties, no freedom to resign, threats of dismissal, deceptive recruitment. So there's a lot of other areas that are not included in this definition, I feel. And then there's also the definition also, although our Anti-Trafficking Act has now done away with coercion simply because of the exclusion, the exclusivity of having to prove physical restraint. But and as we know, in 2022, as Dr. Ravi pointed out, the whole definition of coercion was abolished, and we now have a new definition. So this definition is welcome, but if you look at it in relation to forced labor, you look at this definition, right, you will find that this amendment actually, again, confines it to physical restraint of movement, because the word "and" there is a conjunction that suggests that the requirement of physical restraint of movements must be accompanied by the elements of threat, deception, or force, right? Again, then limiting and clearly defining the boundaries of forced labor. So I believe the amendment is welcome, but confining it again to this definition and for it requiring physical restraint again contradicts the amendment, and it fails to also include the 11 indicators of forced labor which is specified by the ILO. And these 11 indicators are extremely important, because without laying down the 11 indicators, there'll be confusion in the law, there'll be a perplexity around forced labor and substandard working conditions, and all this will continue to exist. And when you have emphasis on freedom of movement without considering other less forms of forced labor that are less visible, then what happens is that it is very highly likely that this will negatively influence the finding of forced labor. And this has repercussions, because this will ultimately result in victims of trafficking in person being treated as smuggled migrants, translating into illegal migrants and criminals in breach of immigration laws, subject to deportation, instead of being treated as victims of trafficking in person, entitled to protection under the Act. So this could essentially make it more likely that victims of human trafficking and forced labor, migrant workers, they will be treated as undocumented migrants and subject to deportation, which is something Mr. Abdul Aziz spoke about as well. So I will leave that here, and I'll just go into protection very briefly. So if you look at protection, right, I would just want to emphasize, look into the right to move freely and the right to work, which is granted under Section 51A. Now, this act was amended in 2015 to allow victims to move freely and to be employed, engaged, or contracted with to carry out work in accordance with their occupation during the period of time of their interim protection order. So, and this amendment and inclusion was made upon recommendation again of the Trafficking in Persons report back in 2014, right? And the amendment provides that they may be granted foreign workers may be granted permission to work, right? So again, the words may be make it clear that the right of work is discretionary and there's no obligation on the government in this regard. And it's also unclear as to whether the provisions include migrant workers of trafficking who entered Malaysia illegally, as well as those who do not have their passports. Because we know that the ATIPSOM Act clearly recognizes that victims of trafficking may arrive in Malaysia illegally by virtue of the definition itself, because in reality, there are migrant workers who enter Malaysia illegally without knowing, having been cheated by unscrupulous agents or duped by labor outsourcing companies. But the provision does not make it clear, and it does not provide clarity as to whether the protection is granted to illegal migrant workers who are trafficked victims as well. So I also feel that in order to facilitate the right to work appropriately, I believe that Section 66 of the ATIPSOM provides MAPO, that MAPO is required to prescribe qualifications, conditions, procedures before granting them the right to work. But this is great. These requirements are great, but I feel that the method is ambiguous. It is not clear, and there is a need to guide this provision. Because, for example, in 2020, Malaysia launched a plan to give undocumented migrants stuck in the country a chance to work in certain industries. But labor rights groups basically found that this initiative did not do enough to protect them. And the program did not fully address the plight of undocumented migrants, but instead, it appears that they were answering the call for some industries to want migrant workers, and it is not crafted with interests of the workers in mind. So I believe that what is needed here is a risk assessment, a risk management to take all issues into account and to ensure that a transparent process for granting these migrant victims of trafficking the right to work is ensured, and to ensure that they are not subject to further exploitation, because that could very well happen. So that's the second one. And lastly, when it comes to prevention, right, I would just like to highlight the supplementary legislation to ATIPSOM, which could also support the implementation. So we have here the issue of migration, because when you look at trafficking of migrant workers or forced labor, this definitely includes the issues of migration, because when the suspected victim of forced labor trafficking is a migrant, he is definitely going to be investigated under the Immigration Act. And the Act provides rules for admissions and stay of migrant workers. And we know here that the Act confers wide powers to immigration officers, as you can see in this section, where if you're not a citizen and you do not possess all these documents, then this is what happens to you: a fine of 10,000, or imprisonment, or you're also liable, and you're also liable to a whipping. So what I find here is in my discussion is basically that this can result in an outcome that does not adequately represent the totality of harm endured by victims, and resulting in classifying them as predatory economic migrants who willingly use, the services of smugglers or as criminals, right? And I find that such an approach may have unintended negative consequences for the victims of trafficking, in spite of some protection against immigration related to the criminal prosecution under the Act. There is also a real danger of misidentifying the victims of trafficking as irregular migrants, resulting in their arrest, detention, and deportation. As we know, a lot of times their documents are confiscated. They do not have their papers, so they end up being arrested as illegal immigrants. So I feel that although the Immigration Act is an important legislation to assist the ATIPSOM to prevent the trafficking of migrant workers or forced labor from a migration perspective, the approach may lead to criminalization of victims for crimes committed while being trafficked and for which they should not be liable. So, and as we know, under the Trafficking in Persons Report 2021, It was also stated that due to the inconsistent efforts, authorities continued to inappropriately penalize trafficking victims for immigration or prostitution violations. Lastly, I want to comment on the freedom of association and access to justice, which was also spoken about by Encik Effendi from the MTUC. I believe I don't know what the 2022 legislation is laying out, but currently migrant workers are allowed to join existing unions established by Malaysian workers under Section 28 of the Trade Unions Act, but the section prevents migrant workers from establishing a union. Right, so I believe as a preemptive strategy to prevent trafficking of migrant workers for forced labor, they should be given a seat at the table and be allowed to serve as union leaders. And I say this because of how the nature of this entire collective has changed over the years. So from previously as a collective bargaining agent, unions have focused on regular local workers and have sidestepped the few migrant workers in the workplaces, if there are any, right? But today, this is not the case. The global labor market is characterized by labor mobility, and the workplaces are now composed of various nationalities. Migration and treatment of non-nationals is today a central arena for expression of values in the law, policy, and practice. So I feel allowing migrant workers to serve as union leaders ought to be given provision in the law. Managing foreign labor is about work relations that require migrant workers to be equally represented to enable them to organize, to articulate, and to defend their interests, like Encik Abdul Aziz just said just now, that is lacking. And lastly, when it comes to prevention, I would just like to talk about the criminalization in terms of corporate liability, which was spoken about by Ms. Ka Ialim, and she spoke about the, how we lack that, but we have a self-industry regulation. I think that is great. I think it is great to have a self-industry regulated code of conduct. But I also think corporate liability is extremely important because, there is the supply chain issue. That's number one. And forced labor and human trafficking are not just supply chain issue. Companies are at risk of criminal liability of any direct use of forced labor or involvement of human trafficking. And this could be through recruitment, through agency workers, through actions of employment, and through subcontractors. So although the ATIPSOM provides for corporate liability, I think we need more in terms of regulating an environment. And we lack that, especially in terms of specific corporate liability and supply chain issues. Because if you look at in certain jurisdictions, there are duties of corporates to issue reports on steps they have taken to prevent human trafficking and forced labor. You have the UK Modern Slavery Act, you have the Federal Acquisition Regulations in UK, and you have the California Transparency Supply Chains Act. So I think it's really important for us to have a robust regulatory framework that includes companies and supply chains. Okay, so I know I'm way out of my time, and I'd just like to conclude that, it's a multifaceted issue and it requires various regulations to be looked at again. And I hope that we can eventually achieve it, although Mr. Abdul Aziz doesn't think so, but I really hope we can achieve it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Priya. Yes, indeed, you have been privileged of being given some extra time, but I'm sure everyone can appreciate that time was well spent. So certainly, Priya, you have highlighted some very important points. And what struck me as well, how important drafting of law can be. And I think I've read somewhere earlier on that while in Malaysia, a lot of cases tend to be prosecuted, the conviction rate is not as not really high, and maybe vague laws could be one of the factors for low prosecution conviction rates. Anyways, so I would like to now open the floor for questions, and if you have a question, you can raise maybe your digital hand in the Zoom function, and I'll I'll invite you to ask question. Maybe you can just introduce yourself and maybe tell us to which speaker you would like to ask that question. Okay. So, okay, so we have Mr. Rubaiyat. Rubaiyat, by the way, is our another PhD student who is doing a PhD on corporate criminal liability, something that Priya has touched on as well. So, Rubaiyat, yes, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. I will take few seconds for asking a question only. Before I ask a question, I am a PhD student here under the Department of Business Law and Taxation. My question is that sometimes Malaysia call for labor and they fixed recruiting cost, suppose 4,000 RM. But in the context of Bangladesh, I have seen that many individual workers, they had to pay 15,000 or even 20,000 RM. And the extra money is distributed to the person who is involved in a manpower business, government officials, or even parliament member. And sometimes I have seen that minister even involved with this organized way to take the money from the poor labor. So from this last discussion from Priya Saha, I've seen that there is no corporate criminal liability or individual criminal liability, even that types of high officials involved within the ambit of the forced labor. So I'm asking to the first speaker discussion, probably Rabi, Dr. Rabi, that do you have any intention or do you have already any law in Malaysia to bring that types of officials or that types of manpower businesses within the ambit of corporate criminal liability or individual liability? That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rubaiyat. Perhaps I can just give a little explanation about the issue that you have mentioned here. And, to be very precise on this particular question, right? Government has challenges, actually, when we're talking about the recruitment fee. Because in most cases, right, or perhaps I'll say majority of the cases here, the recruitment fee or recruiting of foreign workers, the recruitment fee was charged by the agent in the source countries. For an example, in Bangladesh, the agent charged up to 20,000 ringgit, Malaysian ringgit, for instance. But that's the limitation that we have in from the government side, because we are unable to control the agent in the source countries. But we always kind of in touch with the policymakers in the source countries to control the recruitment mechanism, for instance, because end of the day, most of the accusations towards us, I mean government, is that the employer in Malaysia is the one charging the recruitment fee, but in fact the fee was charged by the agent in the source countries. And our law, our legislation does not provide any control over a third party in the source countries. You see, that's a challenge that we have. So it involves some kind of mechanism that both parties, source countries as well as destination country like Malaysia, need to sit down and have more robust mechanism, at least in controlling the fee, the recruitment fee or something like that, which at the moment is a bit challenging. I have to admit that from the government side. Even we have G2G, government to government mechanism involving Malaysia and Bangladesh, but still there are some gaps. We have to admit that, yeah.
Dr. Ravi, before I go on to Mr. Abdulaziz and Priya, I just want to clarify, so who pays the fees? Is it the employer or employees? So perhaps maybe you can tell us your view, and then we can as well maybe ask Dr. Shamsuddin to clarify, because I believe Mr. Abdulaziz earlier on alluded that employees, if I'm not mistaken, are the ones who are paying that fee. Yeah, would you like to comment on that before we go on to Dr. Shamsuddin for his comment?
Yeah, in most scenarios, right, employers in Malaysia, they will try, I mean, like, of course, employers, they want lots of employers, for instance. So they will try to look for a middleman or kind of agents in the source countries in the practice, right? So when they approach this agent, okay, let's say for an example, like in a scenario, I need 50 workers, for instance. So the agent there in the source countries, they will, I mean, of course, the agents is legal agents, the one appointed by the government of the source countries. But the agents there, they charge certain amounts. The certain amounts, which is sometimes translated as the charge by employees in Malaysia.
Okay, so basically the employers are the ones, you are saying that they are the ones who are paying for the recruitment agents.
Not really, not in the sense that employers have to be blamed, not at all. Employers, sometimes they will have to be dependent on the agents in the source countries for their source of workers.
Okay.
So the issue relies with the agents in the source countries.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Ravi. I'll go on to Dr. Shamsuddin, perhaps to comment on the same.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Prof. Adnan. Basically, of course, I mean, when we talk about the current practice, what had been said by Dr. Mahalingam possibly is that the situation where before the international community imposes what we call it as zero-cost recruitment. Basically now people talks about zero-cost recruitment where any fees paid by the workers to the agents at the source country will be, of course, the responsibility of the employers in Malaysia now. And of course, that's why you can see that when, say, for example, like, the Top Glove, when they were imposed with sanctions by the US authorities, then the Top Glove have to make remediation for the fees incurred by the foreign workers to the agents. And so the amount is not a small amount. Sometimes it can be, yes, 15,000 ringgit, 20,000 ringgit per pax. And of course, in the case of this particular company, they paid more than 150 million just to resolve the issue about this payment made to the agents. And that, of course, is very, very expensive. But the irony is that we as employers are even not sure whether that, the money that we send back we remitted to Bangladesh, for example, are really being paid to the workers, or it ended somewhere else. That is, I think, a major issue that of course is faced by the stakeholders in trying to address this issue. So I think foreign workers now, they don't have to worry about the fees they paid to the agents at the source country, because it will be, of course, be borne by the employers in Malaysia. But of course, the only thing is that I think that the source country government has to really come strong and regulate the matter so that there is transparency on the subject. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Shamsuddin. It comes to me that when employers pay fees to the agents in source country, that perpetuates the issue. And earlier on, Priya alluded that can we abolish that sort of system where you have to go to the agents in source countries? Is there any possibility of direct employment? But yeah, I mean, Dr. Shamsuddin, any views on that?
Yeah. I mean, yes, there is a possibility for direct G to G arrangement. Like say, for example, like recently, the government of Malaysia and the government of Bangladesh, together, of course, together with the Sri Lanka government, had each agreed to send 10,000 employees from Bangladesh and also 10,000 from Sri Lanka under G2G government. And of course, I would say that the fees involved at the source country is very, very minimal. In the case of Bangladesh, it was about 4,000 ringgit. In the case of Sri Lanka, it is less than 3,000 ringgit per employee. Yeah, so that I would say, if it is to be, of course, be practiced for the future, that I would say is most welcome. Yeah?
Right.
There is a possibility to do that.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Shamsuddin. So I'll move on. We have 3 questions. I'll let everyone ask questions, and then we can perhaps discuss. I know we have, it's more than 12 now, but I will use my discretion as the chair to extend this session. So please do bear with us. This is very interesting. I think the best part is this dialogue, I suppose. Mr. Abdulaziz, go ahead first with your question or comment.
I just want to ask from the Dr. Rawi with regard to this. This is what we were told by the Home Ministry. Right? So we have about 4 over million of undocumented migrants in which they were brought in legally into this country, and now they are termed as illegal immigrants just because they were brought in to companies without business infrastructure. It's about more than 500,000. And then how we address this one, number one. Number two, whenever the migrant workers complain about unpaid wages, and we refer to MAPO does not respond accordingly, in which even the illegal workers, they were forwarded into the detention center, even though they are legal workers when they complain about unpaid wages. Right? And then normally they were abused under Article 51 3B2 of the Article Act, and normally they will also misuse the Immigration Act 59B and 51C, if I'm not mistaken. And also, none of the employers, when they abuse the workers by withhold their retention of their passport, was not was not prosecuted or investigated accordingly. And then through your experience, one migrant workers, when we establish their labor traffic victim, there is cheating, fraud, falsifying of documents, unlawful deduction of wages, unlawful and also money laundering and corruption. If we were to establish one worker itself, so how you address this one? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Abdulaziz. Before Ravi answers the question, we can maybe have Priya's question and Dr. Abdul Majid's question as well. Yeah, Priya, go ahead.
It's not really, it's not a question. It was a comment in relation to the fees. I just also wanted to highlight here that under the Private Employment Agencies Act, right, under the first schedule, placement fees is allowed, as in there is, according to the first schedule, allowable placement fees is imposed on migrant workers, and they are capped to not more than 1 month of the basic wages. But the problem is the Act does not define what comprises a placement fee. So as a result, the majority of migrant workers in Malaysia end up paying fees to recruitment agents in Malaysia, as well as recruitment agents in their home country. And this has been documented to contribute to their vulnerability, to debt bondage and forced labor. So the definition of placement fees is also not clear.
Okay, thank you, Priya. Dr. Abdul Majid? We can't hear you, Majid. You are not on mute, but we couldn't hear you. Yeah, yeah, we can't hear you, Majid. So maybe until Majid, you fix that issue with the audio, we can move on to the question from Mr. Selva. Yeah, please go ahead.
Hi, Doctor. Thanks, Priya. The fundamental thing here is the Private Employment Agency Act. So before we move on, we have to go back to the history whereby there was outsourcing license holders, right? So the outsourcing license was banned in 2018. So they all were put a stop. Thereafter, they were awarded with A, B, C licenses. The object is to recruit and placement. That's it. But what happens now is they recruit, they manage, and they deploy. So the outsourcing has taken a different form to supply workers. So the many companies, I think if you're aware, recently Ninja went, where there was an arrest, 500 over workers were arrested. There are vendors who supply workers, where the workers are being registered under them. So this was the major objective of the abolishment of the outsourcing license, because they are ransacked, the exploitation takes place there. Because the independent committee report was not published. And I think Dato' Samsudin was summoned by the committee to discuss and get inputs. When he mentioned that the recruitment fees can be capped, that is something which is impossible. It is taking place in their domestic land. We don't have control. So when they are here in the disguise, still money has been deducted. So end of the day is we need a very clear, transparent policy. And if I may quote, Philippines POEA is an example which we can minimize the rent seekers. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Silva. Majid, did we get your audio or? No, we still don't. You can maybe write a question in the chat section or yeah. So I go to Dr. Ravi now to address the question raised earlier on by Mr. Abdulaziz.
Sure. Okay, the question by Mr. Abdulaziz is a very tricky one. You know, when we are talking about how to, address undocumented migrants, it's really a tricky question. This is ongoing for the past how many years now, about talking about undocumented migrants. But from the government side, true, based on my own observation, right? The government has the challenge in balancing, especially when you're talking about illegal migrants. It falls under the purview of the Ministry of Home Affairs. And the biggest challenge faced by the ministry is that how to balance national security and human rights. When you're talking about undocumented migrants, most of the focus are, given or discussed from the human rights perspective. But from the ministry's purview, it's more on sovereignty and national security. So that's the challenge that we have. And for instance, when during the pandemic, for instance, right, there's so much of enforcement's been carried out. Not only during pandemic, before that also, on undocumented migrants, then there are groups or some issues related to human rights. So it's when there's so much of issues of crime related or involving, this this group undocumented migrants, then public talked about the inefficiency of government of ensuring the security of public. So which one we have to focus? That's the priority. That's the issue that faced by the Ministry of Home Affairs. That is one thing. And talking about MAPO unable to solve some issues and stuff like that, I'd just like to give some clearance or some justification. It's not about justification, but more on clarification, right? MAPO is actually a coordinating office under the Ministry of Home Affairs. We doesn't have a team that investigate, prosecute, or cases. What we do at the MAPO level is more on management of cases. And if, let's say, there is any complaints or any issues forwarded to us, we will redirect the issues to the relevant enforcement agencies. For an example, Royal Malaysian Police or Immigration Department of Malaysia. So, of course, we follow up in a sense that we doesn't really follow on the the whole process of investigation, prosecution, or to that extent, but we more on case management, and of course we also focus more on the policies, on the capacity building and awareness. That's the limitation that we have at the moment at MAPO. But nevertheless, we always encourage public to forward their complaints or perhaps some suggestions how to improvise to MAPO as a council itself, as a coordinating agency.
Right, thank you, Dr. Ravi. Well, you pointed out earlier on that one of the major issues is implementation and enforcement, and maybe the solution as well could be to expand the powers of MAPO so that things could be done quicker and more efficiently. We have a question by Ms. Aminath, which my question is on regularization of illegal migrant workers. Are there efforts being made at the state level to regularize migrant workers, as in most cases, the situation where they become illegal in the eyes of the law is due to them not having work visa or passport, which in the first place is a situation they find themselves in due to employers confiscating these documents. This is one of the questions, and the other question as well, Ms. Lim has asked Dr. Ravi to as well expand on what national security entails. So first, not sure who is the right person to, maybe Dr. Ravi, I suppose, as well to answer Amina's question.
Well, I can just give some glimpse on how the efforts to regularize migrant workers, right, and especially undocumented migrants. If I look back at the history, I think Mr. Selwa is here. He's former immigration officer. Immigration Department of Malaysia has carried out many what's it called regularization activities. Before the 6P, if you could relate what is 6P before this, we have done that, and recently we have Immigration Department have carried out return and reintegration program to regularize undocumented migrants. So that kind of programs is a kind of a one-off or from time to time. It's not like throughout the year, because we don't want to open floodgate and think that Malaysia, anyone can just enter Malaysia without proper documentation and then eventually can get regularized. That's not the idea, at least from the Ministry of Home Affairs point of view. So that's what actually its national security is all about. Answering the second question, we have to ensure our borders are secure. Talking about national security, it has lots of points. National security is not only about, for instance, during the pandemic, or talking about health security. That is part and parcel of national security as well. Then after that, we have to talk about the consent by MNCs or those investors want to invest in Malaysia. When they see lots of undocumented migrants, issues related to refugees, for instance, they think twice to invest. And you like it or not, that's some of the factors that the foreign investors look at. And some of the concerns is, what are the possible threat that may be caused by this group of people which we call as aliens sometimes, but of course it's not a proper word to use, but I'm just giving some examples how they were considered by some investors or some groups. So that's a bit always tricky, but we have to do something about it. That for definite. But that's why government try to always try to engage with human rights groups, how to balance the issue related to national security and human rights.
Right. I think before I go to Priya, it will be interesting to hear from Mr. Selva on, is it possible to keep our borders secure and at the same time to regularize illegal or undocumented workers where necessary? How do you balance that?
To be very frank, the legalization process, it mirrors the GE, general election. Every 5 years, Mr. Ravi, if you agree with me, every 5 years, we used to have, you name it, we have it. From 1990s, we had so many programs until I think before I retired, 2012, they were encouraging the illegals to register. Ravi, I don't know if you recall, and then all the employers, because I sit in this WGEI, Pemuda Group, and every employer were crying foul because everybody was running from company A to company B to get registered. Then we encourage them, all the legals to get registered. Legals to get registered. Thereafter, we see a lot of hiccups. Then all those were just silent. They were quietly waiting for another 5 years. The government will announce another program. And just for the meetings notice, I'm one of the independent committee member. Okay. So in our independent committee report, that is still an embargo, I think Mr. Ravi has a copy. All right. We have suggested that we give a flush out program. That means all the illegals, you leave without any penalties. But unfortunately, they turned the table whereby they inform, they announce, leave, pay 500, blacklist for life. That failed the system. Where many didn't leave the country with the hope that things can be done. Things can be done. So that is the big issue now. And thereafter, the political turmoil, suddenly KDN graciously changed the position whereby it assigned human resources to manage the recruitment. And many has gone to human resources. Now, KDN said they are not their caretaker any further. Talking about security, KDN got nothing to do with security. MHR got nothing to do with the security. The guardian is, what do you call that? MSN, Malaysian National Security. They are the guardian, not KDN, not MOHR. Ravi, correct me if I'm wrong. So we have 3 people safeguarding one issue. The border is not porous. The border is too liquid, and everybody is pointing finger at each other. So now the issue here, the elephant in the room is everybody wants to take the helm. Now quietly, Hamza Zainuddin pushed it to Saravanan and made him as a punching bag. And now Parliament has dissolved and we are at status quo. And recruitment fees, everything. Nepal has succeeded, 0 recruitment cost. And Bangladesh in the verge of it, but it was, I don't know. I don't want to mention parties here because no point of talking who is right, who is wrong, how is corrupt. Even MEF cannot move anything. I pity MEF. They are the most strongest body here. Even ENE has a lot of problem in Penang because I sit with MPC. We do a lot of programs there, but still we are stuck. And most important chunk here is construction and what shall I say? Construction and agriculture, palm oil. They are stuck. They are the main contributors to the GDP. They don't have workers now. The palm oil sector is stalled. So we engage a lot with MPOA and MPOB. So there is we are in a catch-22 now. We are in catch-22 now. We are tier 2 for consecutive second year. And if you read the TIP report, inefficient prosecution. And if you read last year's TIP report, 33% of the GLC palm oil owned by government, and forced labor took place there. So it is, we can't point finger to anyone, you know. We need an absolute overhaul. We can't blame MAPO. MAPO is just an icing. Cake is somebody else. They are only a secretariat. They got no power. Pity MAPO. Everybody is thinking MAPO is the body, please lah. And we must be very grateful for Ravi to come and give something. As an ex-government servant, what we will do, we will soon, someone junior, you go and get the punching and come back. We will see where you are, when we will put some ointment for you. Sorry to say, let's be realistic in this. Let us be realistic. So I think Priya, your initiative is good, very good. I wish you all the luck. And Prof, I have to say what I have to say. I have to call a spade a spade. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. That's what we want. We want everyone to speak up their mind, and because I believe everyone has the good and noble objective. It's just that the way we achieve that objective may be different. Now, we are way over time, but we have had Priya and Ka as well. They have raised their hands. Maybe.
Can I quickly
yes, I can allow you to comment, and then we will finish after
Ka very quickly.
as well. Yeah.
So, from what I find, this whole issue of trafficking of migrant workers for forced labor, right? It involves management of migrant workers, and this is handled by the Ministry of Human Resource and the Ministry of Home Affairs. And we know, like, as Selva just said just now, that, the chairperson of MAPO is the Ministry of Home Affairs. And basically, the Ministry of Home Affairs tends to prioritize, like Dr. Ravi just said, national security concerns over, I believe, economic and human security. And in a way, I think perhaps maybe this approach breeds systemic corruption. And maybe that's why we are having, it's created a breeding ground for the rampant forced labor that we see today, and, that's happening in GLCs. So, now, looking at the different ministries that's handling various aspects of management of migrant workers, do you think two ministries have been having two ministries is problematic and has actually led to a lot of abuse and forced labor? Because even the 2021 Trafficking in Person report has highlighted the arrest of 41 law enforcement personnel under the purview of Ministry of Home Affairs. And, this includes the case of a particular minister, but never mind, let's move on from that. So I think that it is inextricably linked, this whole issue, to three aspects: national security, economic security, and human security. So how do we solve this problem in bringing everything together? Do we need a task force at its highest level to tackle this systemic problem, overhaul, or how does this whole thing, how can we develop, regulate, and force this whole system, which is so inextricably linked?
Priya, you go and have a look of the independent report. We have covered everything you wished. Everything you wished is there.
Okay, fantastic. So I suppose those are very, questions where we will have to have part two to really address all of those in details. And yeah, maybe independent report would be a good starting point for part two discussion. Ms. Ka Lim, please go ahead.
Thank you. Sorry for taking more time. I guess I asked a question about trying to understand national security is because I am grappling with trying to really see that as a compelling reason. Obviously, I need to be educated on this because I'm not an expert in home affairs, immigration issue, but I'm talking from the perspective of our members or employers, right? Which MEF might empathize as well, because the reality on the ground is we are hearing companies not having enough workers. And the reality on the ground is Malaysia do need migrant workers because we don't have locals who are willing to fulfill those workforce. So this issue is perpetually there. So I'm looking at all these undocumented workers who have become undocumented, most of them not by choice, because they could have had issues with previous employers, or they could be actually victims of forced labor or trafficking or whatsoever, but they are in the country already. So my question would be, looking from a practical point of view, how do you ask the question, how do you actually balance between national security but also human rights? But I'm also looking at the point of view of practicality of fulfilling the workforce that's sorely lacking here. So I hear that regularizing these workers could eventually create a problem where people could just come in every time illegally, and then they think that they could be regularized. But I'm not sure whether that really is the issue yet, because I don't see that while being, reluctant in doing that, it's not necessarily solving the problem. So I guess my question is, why are we not utilizing, I hate to use the word, but existing workers who are already here and making them, legal workers, being able to fulfill the workforce. But on the other hand, also, when they are undocumented, they are invisible. I don't know how that is contributing to securing national security when millions of these workers are invisible. We have no idea who they are, what they're doing, and how is that contributing to national security. So I guess I'm grappling with this, and obviously it's a long discussion, but I do hope that we can look at a practical solution rather than something, just by principle and not willing to move forward from there.
Thank you, Ms. Lim. I'm not sure whether Mr. Silva wants to. Yes, yeah.
Have you been to Pasar Borong? I was at Klang Pasar Borong, fully controlled by Bangladeshis. You go to Klang, many shops has been run by Bangladeshis. You go to behind Bar Council, many shops been run by Nepalese and Bangladeshis. So now, in disguise of our weakness, it's not their strength. It is not the migrant strength. It's the bureaucracy weaknesses has opened the floodgate for them to do business. Let me register this very firmly here, that migrant workers are here not to work. They are here to do business. They have gone one step further. And many Malaysians are working for them. I have clients who have approached me, whereby their drivers are Malaysians. A question you can ask, what happened to Malaysians? When you pay peanut, you get monkeys. Why employers pay 7,000? This is what we did in MPC. I'm an associate with MPC. 7,000 odd for one foreigner, whereas for one local, we pay around 1,000 plus. But yet, employers chooses to go for foreigner because of sustainability, productivity. Confirm they will work for 7 days a week. When you have locals, the problem is in-house. We don't have good workforce here because in Singapore, we have Malaysian as janitors there. Why? Payment is good. So what I'm trying to say here is the employers also must take a positive approach in recognizing their efforts, recognizing that they are one of the bricks of their walls. That is the fundamental. I think we need to revisit our approach towards our locals. And of course, end of the day, money matters. End of the day, money matters. Sarawak's approach is different. Sabah approach is different. When we had the town hall session in Sarawak, they even have agreed to bring in the spouses of the foreign workers because they will be sitting in the jungle. They need entertainment. So we said that is a positive approach because palm oil is the biggest chunk. So I think we with the elephant in the room, everybody is closing their eyes. That's the fact. And no point pointing finger at anyone. We need to regularize. We need to regularize because we have three generals here, the KDN, MOHR, and the, we call it National Security Council. They are the safeguardian of everything. When you talk about national security, please don't let the water mingle. Don't push the buck to KDN for national security. They are not the guardian. I would like to register this very firmly. I think Ravi will conquer because national security, NSC. Ravi?
Yeah, right. And the most important thing, all the points that you mentioned is very valid. And of course, end of the day, we have to understand the reality of the day is that political will is, can supersede everything, There must be a political will for change. There's so much of things like what Ms. Ka Lim has mentioned, how to regularize or how, practical way. Yes, government have, conducted many programs like a reintegration program I mentioned just now. And then even when you're looking from the refugee group of people, we have more than 200,000 people in Malaysia and we can utilize them well. And government did a kind of a pilot test involving 50 refugees, if not mistaken, placing them in a plantation and stuff like that. But change of government have made, total change. What happened to the pilot project? We can ask them, ask that again. But end of the day, when we look into things, the most important thing is the political will. So if let's say we want, of course, end of the day, we are the executives. You like it or not, we just follow orders at times. Of course, we plan, we come out with the proposal plans. Some of the plans are good, seriously good. But what will happen when there is no political will or, whatever you take it, there is no permission from the top gun, nothing can be implemented. So that's important when we are talking about the collaboration between government, NGOs, how much NGO can push the agenda, push the agenda for a betterment. And we have to think everything from the theory of change, for instance,
Right. This is very interesting. The political will is shaped by the elections, and we have elections soon, and hence your point on the importance of promoting the importance of these issues to the public. So the public elect people to the offices who will appreciate these issues the way we appreciate them. On this note, I really genuinely want to thank you all for such a wonderful contributions. I think we need to have this kind of conversations, more often where different stakeholders are involved. And Priya, I would really like to congratulate you for putting such a great panel. I think we need part two, and part two perhaps needs to be a dialogue more than a presentation, because this dialogue is something that really is useful, so we can hear different perspectives. Once again, thank you all very much, and I look forward to seeing you again, perhaps in part two, sometimes after the elections.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much for your contribution.
Thank you. Thank you. Excellent.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye, everyone. Have a nice day.